one thing that he said in the introduction that I might need to clarify or correct, and it's always probably not good form to correct the person that introduces you, but he said that the reason that those pastors were sitting out there, that they all wanted to be up there speaking. I've been a pastor. The truth is, it wasn't that they wanted to be giving the speech, they wanted to be taking the offering. So that's thank you very much for coming out on the Thursday evening. I'm going to say a special thanks to Brian and Rachel for having us in their home. It's a beautiful area. I thought it was absolutely brand new. They said it's been here a few years and they keep it immaculately, so whatever their secrets are, we'll try not to mess it up tonight too much. But thank you, Brian and Rachel, for having us here. It's an honor to be in your home and to have many of your friends to come and join you, and maybe some folks that you don't know, and maybe you will tonight. I want to say to each of you who have gathered, we've got just a few days and a few weeks before the straw poll. And that's going to be a time when all the attention of the country is going to be focused on this state and on Ames, Iowa, and the campus at Iowa State. That day is going to be a really important date, not just for me as a candidate, it's going to be an important date for the country. There are going to be some campaigns that probably won't get past August 11th. We're counting on the fact that you and your friends are going to be there and you'll help us get not only past it, but that this will be the springboard to prove that the candidacies of some that the national media out on the East Coast have anointed are not the candidacies that really represent the mainstream Republican voters in places like Arkansas or Iowa. We had a good week this week. Not only were we traveling all over the state, all up in the northeast corner and the north central part, but a very exciting piece of news came out. The Associated Press this week has now named us the leader among all the Republican candidates in the national polls. Now, I know some of you probably missed that. You said, well, I didn't see that. I saw a poll, the AP said that none of the so-called frontrunners were acceptable and that the leading candidate was none of the above. Well, I wanted to let you know that I am none of the above. I would like to put a stake in the ground tonight and tell you that the reason that we can win in not only August, but we can win this election is because I am none of the above. Now, what do we mean by none of the above? What is it that's unsatisfactory? Well, for some people, it's that the positions of candidates that they've not been consistent. They've taken three sides of a two-sided issue repeatedly. And so you don't really know not just where they've been, where they are, but where will they be when the real roll call is going to matter. In some cases, it's the positions simply don't reflect who we are as people that got into the Republican Party, got into this whole realm of politics because of deeply held principles. I got to tell you, I became a Republican as a teenager in Hope, Arkansas. It was not an easy place to become a Republican. Even to this day, Republicans are still about as popular as a fire hydrant in a neighborhood full of dogs. So you just don't really want to just go out there and tell everybody that you're a Republican. There weren't any Republicans in my county growing up. There were maybe 7 or 8 that had moved in from Kentucky or Indiana, but nobody that I ever knew, born and raised in Hope, Arkansas, grew up naturally a Republican. And I'm not kidding. There just weren't any. To this day, 86% of elected officials in the state are still Democrat. When I was sworn in as governor, over 90% of the state legislature that I had to work with was Democrat. Now, I learned to work with them, which I think is the quality of a president that people want in this country. They don't want someone to go and just keep everything polarized and paralyzed, which is the problem we've got now. People expect us to get a job done, and they expect us to somehow figure out a way to make it work and to do that with effectiveness. For 10.5 years, I served as a governor, balancing budgets and doing things that I think a president ought to have to be able to do. And part of it is to show that real leadership is communicating and articulating our message. But more than that, it's making sure that we remember where we came from and how much of a struggle some folks have. I often ask this question: how many folks in the room are living better than they ever dreamed they'd be living when they were little kids? And my hand is the first one that goes up, because nobody can say that probably more emphatically than me. I grew up in a working class family. A father who had never graduated high school, nor had his father or his father before him. When I graduated high school, I was the first male in my entire family lineage to ever do it. My dad worked 2 jobs, and that was just barely enough to pay the rent on a little rent house we lived in on 2nd Street in Hope, Arkansas. To put it in perspective for you, I remember my dad worked with his hands. He always had the day's work on his hands. No matter how hard he scrubbed, he could never quite get it off. The only soap we had in our house when I was a kid was lava. Now, let me explain that. I was in college before I realized that a shower isn't supposed to hurt. Gives you some idea if you've never used lava. If you need an exfoliation, just use lava soap. It'll do it every time. But I didn't have a rough life. I had a great life because I was living in this country where no matter where you start, you can end up wherever you really want to be. And I don't want us to ever come to the place in this country where we look behind us to think that America's greatest days really were. And I refuse to think that the greatest generation is the one that's already lived. I want to say the greatest generation is the one that hadn't even been born yet. But if that's going to happen, it means that we're going to have to show some real leadership and change the direction, because right now this country is so divided. And that's not a healthy thing. Now, there's some things I really believe in. And I don't think people mind a person having deep convictions. In fact, I think even if they disagree with me, they at least want to know where I'm coming from. Not everybody agreed with Ronald Reagan, but people liked him because they knew what he believed. And they knew what he believed because he knew what he believed. And he didn't take an opinion poll every week to say, well, let's see, what do I need to think today? And I'll say whatever it is people are expecting me to say. That's what's wrong in America. We've got way too much thermometer leadership. And the thermometer leader is the one who can simply read the temperature of the room from polls and focus groups and just repeat back what's being said out there in the world. But we need thermostat leadership. The thermostat knows what the temperature is, but it adjusts to what it ought to be. And that's truly kind of leadership that I hope to bring to the presidency and to the United States. I tell people I'm unapologetically and unabashedly a person who believes in the sanctity of human life. And I believe it more than I've ever believed it, because I too truly believe that it represents and helps to explain what makes us unique as an American people. I want you to think about this. We value and we elevate and we celebrate human life to the point that we treat each individual as if it represents the rest of us. And that's why when the 12-year-old Boy Scout gets lost in the woods in North Carolina, we don't just say to his parents, you know, I'm sorry, your kid's lost, and if you can't find him, that's just too bad. No, we organize search parties and we go looking for him until we find him. When 3 hikers get stranded in Mount Hood, Oregon, we launch every helicopter and every airplane we can. We send out the snowmobiles because we want to find those guys. And it's not because they're Nobel Prize winners or on the just cusp of creating a cure for cancer. It's because they're fellow human beings, and we believe their lives have intrinsic worth. The same thing is true for a co-ed that goes missing in Wisconsin, or for the coal miners in Sago, West Virginia, when the mine explodes. We all grieve when something happens to another human being, because it represents us too. Now think about what a different way of life it is for us to believe that every life is valuable and has intrinsic worth given by God, as opposed to the Islamic jihadist who would strap a bomb to the belly of their own children and march that child into a room like this full of innocent people, detonate the bomb, and then celebrate the martyrdom of the child and the death of innocent people, all in the name of religion. We are at war. But the war we're in right now is not a traditional geopolitical war being fought over boundaries and borders or being fought against leaders and principalities. It's being fought because there is a theological capacity to this that is unlike anything we've ever experienced before. We're not fighting an army, a country, a leader. We're fighting a warped, perverted theology, religious fanaticism that believes that every one of us should disappear from the face of the earth, so that a kingdom of a very fanatic religion can be put in place. And it's a threat not just to Jews and to Christians, but to moderate Muslims as well. Because every single one of us are unacceptable to the jihadists who have convinced themselves that earth can't be peaceful until they're rid of us. That's why it's a serious issue that the next president's going to face. But it's not the only one. We got some issues at home. And I want to say that there's been a somewhat of a lack of discussion sometimes about some of the issues here in our own country. And when people ask, well, what do you think is going to be most important as president? Taking on the issues internationally or the ones here at home? It was like asking me when I get on an airplane, which wing is most important? The one on the left or the one on the right? Personally, I kind of like for both wings to be firmly attached to the fuselage when I fly. I just found that the airplane works so much better with both wings. And that's how I look at the job of being president, is that you don't choose which wing is most important, you pay attention to making sure that both get the level of attention they need. And that means that in this country, we've got to do some things that remind